She was 8 months pregnant when her mother-in-law handed her a suitcase and said with a smile, "We have already chosen someone better, not behind closed doors, not in a whisper, in the front hallway, in front of the housekeeper who had served that family for 11 years, in front of the gateman standing just outside, in front of the woman already seated in the living room, the replacement, who looked up from her phone, glanced at Ada's stomach, and looked back down. That image. A pregnant woman holding a suitcase in her own home while another woman sits in her chair. Remember it, because every single person who was comfortable in that hallway will spend the rest of this story losing something they cannot get back. And the woman with the suitcase? She had been waiting for this moment for 6 months. Her name was Ada Osei. She was 31 years old. She had a master's degree in public health, a quiet laugh that people remembered long after they forgot everything else about her, and a secret so large that the family currently throwing her out had been living inside it without knowing. But we will get to that. First, let me tell you who Ada was before she became someone's cautionary tale. She grew up in Yos, in a house that sat at the end of a long red dirt road where the Harmattan came early every year and the evenings smelled like firewood and rain. Her father, Emmanuel Osei, was not a man who talked about money. He talked about work. He talked about purpose. He talked about what it meant to build something that would outlast you. Emmanuel had started with a single trucking contract in 1981. By 1995, he had a logistics company. By 2005, he had a foundation. By the time Ada was finishing secondary school, Emmanuel Osei's name opened doors in 4 states. Not because he demanded it, but because he had spent 20 years treating people the way most powerful men never bother to. He paid his drivers on time. He remembered their children's names. He funded a clinic in his hometown, not because a politician asked him to, but because a woman from his village died of something preventable, and he decided that was the last time. Ada watched all of this and understood something early. Wealth is not the point. What you do with it. That is the entire point. When Emmanuel died, Ada was 26. The grief was enormous and clean, the way grief is when you have lost someone who gave you everything they had and held nothing back. He left behind a foundation, a trust, shares in 3 companies, and a letter to Ada that she read once, folded carefully, and kept in the bottom drawer of every desk she ever owned. She did not tell people about any of it. Not because she was ashamed, because she had learned, watching her father, watching the people around her father, that money changes the way people look at you. Ada wanted to be looked at clearly. She wanted to know who people really were before she let them matter to her. That was where she met Kletchi Naji. Kletchi came to one of the outreach events on a Saturday morning. He came as a donor, which in Ada's experience meant he would stay for 40 minutes, take photographs, and leave feeling charitable. He was well dressed in the specific way of men whose mothers still approved their outfits. He had an easy confidence and a laugh you could hear from 2 rooms away. Ada was registering pregnant women for prenatal checkups when he walked over and said, "Can I help with anything?" She handed him a clipboard without looking up. Table 3 needs someone to explain the registration process. Speak slowly. Some women have been waiting since 6 this morning and they are tired. He took the clipboard. He stayed until 4 in the afternoon. Ada noticed. She did not say anything, but she noticed. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that, not with cameras, not with a convoy. He came alone, in simpler clothes, and he worked. He was not graceful about it. He asked too many questions and once accidentally gave a woman the wrong form and had to apologize 3 times. But he was present. He was trying. Ada watched him try and measured him against a quiet internal standard she had never explained to anyone. How does he treat the women who have nothing to give him? With patience, with genuine attention, without the faint condescension that wealthy people sometimes cannot hear in their own voices. After 6 Saturdays, he asked if he could take her to dinner. She said, "Why?" He blinked. "Because I would like to know you better. You could ask me questions here. I'm asking you to dinner." Ada looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Somewhere local, nothing expensive." He smiled. "Done." They talked for 3 hours that evening at a small restaurant near the market where the plastic chairs wobbled and the pepper soup was extraordinary. Kletchi talked about his work. He ran the operations side of his father's construction company, a role he had taken reluctantly and was slowly beginning to respect. He talked about Lagos with the mixture of exhaustion and love that only people who truly belong to a city can manage. He asked about her family. Ada gave him the version she gave everyone. Her father had passed. She had been raised with strong values and modest means, no surviving relatives close enough to count. She had learned to depend on herself. Kletchi listened carefully. Then he said, "That sounds lonely sometimes." It was not the response most people gave. Most people either offered sympathy that felt rehearsed or moved on quickly because death made them uncomfortable. Kletchi just named it honestly and waited. Ada looked at him across the wobbling plastic table and felt the first crack in her careful distance. Not love yet. Something earlier than love. Recognition. They dated for 9 months. They married in a ceremony so small that the guest list fit in one vehicle. Ada requested the simplicity. Kletchi agreed immediately, which told her something. His parents agreed less immediately, which told her something else. Chief Naji, Kletchi's father, was the kind of man who could fill a room with his personality and leave everyone in it feeling slightly diminished. He had built his construction empire on a combination of genuine skill and connections that he maintained like a garden, carefully, constantly, with an eye always on what each relationship could produce. He welcomed Ada into the family the way a customs officer welcomes a traveler, with a smile that is doing a job. His wife, Obiageli, Obi to the family, was more sophisticated in her cruelty. She had the gift of saying something devastating in a tone so warm that you spent an hour afterward wondering if you had misunderstood. At the first family dinner after the wedding, she told Ada, "My dear, you are so refreshingly simple." Kletchi always did have a kind heart. She squeezed Ada's hand when she said it. Ada smiled and passed the rice. She had heard the blade inside the compliment. She chose not to bleed yet. The questions started within the first month. Chief Naji was methodical about it. He never asked anything directly. He came at information from the sides, the way a man circles something he wants without wanting to be seen wanting it. Your father's people. Are any of them still in Jos? Your guardian after your father passed? He had no children of his own? You mentioned working with a foundation. Is that a paying position or more of a volunteering arrangement? Ada answered each question with the truth she had chosen to offer. No family, no estate, no safety net, just herself. Chief Naji would nod each time with the expression of a man filing information in a cabinet he intended to use later. Ada watched him nod and understood something that made her very still inside. He was not getting to know her. He was building a case for why she could be removed, and she was letting him build it. Because Ada had not come into this family without a plan. She had come in with patience, the patience of a person who has learned that the most important thing is not to stop the wrong from happening. The most important thing is to let it happen in front of witnesses. She was waiting for the Naji family to reveal themselves completely. They were doing it faster than she expected. The first time Obi crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, it was a Tuesday afternoon in the 3rd month of the marriage. Ada had come home from the outreach clinic earlier than expected. She was 7 weeks pregnant, too early to show, too new to announce. She had not told anyone yet except Kletchi, who had held her hands when she told him and said nothing for a full minute and then said, "I am going to be somebody's father," in a voice so quiet and stunned it made Ada laugh for the first time in weeks. She came through the back entrance to avoid the afternoon sun and heard voices in the sitting room. Obi's voice, and a voice Ada recognized as belonging to Obi's elder sister, who visited on Tuesdays. "The girl has nothing," Obi said, "not unkindly, the way you state a fact about weather. No people, no backing, no name that means anything. Kletchi married her because she is gentle, and he has always been too soft." The sister murmured something Ada could not catch. Obi continued, "We are already looking. There is a family in Abuja, the Ease family. Their daughter studied in London. Good background, solid connections. If this current situation does not produce what we need quickly, she paused. We will manage. Ada stood in the corridor. Her hand went to her stomach. The baby was not showing yet, but she pressed her palm there anyway. Instinctive, the way bodies know things before minds catch up. She did not walk into that room. She walked to the kitchen, made herself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. Then she called one number. A number stored in her phone under a name that looked like a salon contact to anyone who might look. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Ada put the phone in her pocket, went upstairs, and began to think carefully about timing. The person she called was a woman named Adayeze Madu. Adayeze was 43 years old. She had graduated first in her class from the University of Lagos School of Law. She had spent 15 years as one of the most precise family law attorneys in the country. She owed Ada's father a debt that no amount of money had ever fully settled, because Emmanuel Osei had paid for every year of her education when Adaize's family had nothing. He had done it without telling anyone, without asking for anything, and without ever mentioning it again. Adaize had spent 15 years being quietly, completely ready to repay that debt in whatever form it needed to take. When Ada called that Tuesday afternoon and explained what she had heard, Adaize listened without interrupting. When Ada finished, Adaize said, I have an idea, but it requires you to do something very difficult. Tell me. I need to go inside. Ada was quiet for a moment. Inside the family, as the replacement. Let them find me. Let them think they chose me. Everything they say to me, every document they show me, every plan they make in front of me, it becomes evidence. Ada closed her eyes. Outside her window, the compound was quiet. The gateman was sweeping the path with slow strokes. Somewhere a generator hummed. How long? Ada said. 8 weeks. Maybe 10. And Kletchi cannot know. No one can know. Not yet. Ada pressed her lips together. 8 weeks of carrying this alone. 8 weeks of sitting at dinner tables with people who were planning to discard her, smiling, passing rice, asking polite questions. 8 weeks while her body grew a child she was not sure she would be allowed to keep. She said, do it. Now I need to stop here. Because I want you to sit with what Ada just agreed to. She was pregnant. She was being actively plotted against by her husband's family. She had just heard her mother-in-law casually discussing her replacement. And instead of confronting them, instead of calling Kletchi into a room and forcing him to choose, she made a plan that required her to absorb more pain in order to build an airtight case. Most people could not do that. Most people would have walked into that sitting room and said everything they heard, because anger is faster than strategy and hurt demands to be expressed immediately. But Ada had grown up watching a man who thought in decades. Emmanuel Osei had never made an important decision from a place of immediate feeling. He would sit with something, sometimes for days. And when he moved in a direction that could not be easily undone. Ada had learned to move the same way, because I genuinely want to know. Most of us are not built for that kind of patience. There is no shame in that, but Ada was. And it was about to matter enormously. Tell me, in that corridor, hearing those words about yourself, could you have walked to the kitchen and made that glass of water? Comment below. Adaize positioned herself within 3 weeks. She appeared first at a business function where Chief Naji was present. Introduced through a mutual contact as a young woman from the Madu family of Enugu, London-trained, excellent background. She was warm. She was impressive. She asked intelligent questions about Chief Naji's work. Chief Naji came home that evening and mentioned her to Obi. Obi invited her to a lunch. The trap was walking into the trap. Meanwhile, at home, Ada performed normalcy with the discipline of a woman who has decided that survival requires artistry. She cooked. She laughed at the right moments. She attended family events and greeted Chief Naji with the deference he expected. She greeted Obi with the warmth Obi performed back at her. And she watched Kletchi. She watched him the way you watch someone you love who is standing too close to an edge, not wanting to startle them, knowing that the wrong word could send them the wrong direction. Kletchi knew something was shifting in his family. He felt the change in temperature the way animals feel weather before it arrives. He came to Ada 3 times in those weeks with versions of the same conversation. The first time, "My father has been asking questions about your background again. I told him it is not his business." The second time, "My mother mentioned a woman she met at a lunch. I do not know what she is planning, but I told her clearly that I am happy in my marriage." The third time, he said nothing. He simply sat beside Ada on the veranda after dinner and looked at the compound wall for a long time. Then he said, "I feel like something is happening that I cannot see." Ada looked at her husband. She looked at the man she had chosen, the man who had stayed until 4 in the afternoon with a clipboard, the man who had said lonely sometimes in a restaurant with wobbling chairs. She said, "Kletchi, whatever happens, I need you to trust that I am handling it." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to trust me." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, concern, uncertainty, and beneath those, something softer. He said, "I trust you." He did not know how much weight those 3 words would carry in the weeks ahead. The document arrived on a Wednesday. Chief Naji brought it to breakfast himself, which was unusual, because Chief Naji did not typically attend breakfast. He sat down, accepted coffee from the housekeeper, and pushed a paper folder across the table toward Ada, as if delivering routine correspondence. "A formality," he said pleasantly. "Medical documentation for the pregnancy, standard practice for families with our level of insurance." Ada opened the folder. She read the first page, then the second. Then she turned back to the first and read it again more slowly. It was not medical documentation. It was a parental authority instrument, a legal document that, if signed, would transfer primary decision-making rights over the child's welfare, medical care, education, and residence to the Naji family trust. Not jointly, primarily. Ada's role was reduced in the language to birth parent, a phrase that appeared once in a subordinate clause, as if it were a minor technical detail. Ada closed the folder. She looked up at Chief Naji. He was drinking his coffee with the ease of a man who expects a formality to be treated as one. Ada said, "I will have my lawyer review this before I sign anything." Chief Naji's cup came down. "Your lawyer," he repeated. "Yes." His voice remained pleasant, barely. "Ada, this is a family matter. Lawyers are for disputes. We are not in dispute." Ada met his eyes. "Then the review will confirm that, and I will sign without hesitation." The pleasantness left his face, not suddenly, like a tide going out, gradual and steady until what remained was something older and colder underneath. He said, "You do not trust this family." Ada said, "I trust process." From across the table, Obi set down her fork. She looked at Ada with an expression that had dropped all pretense of warmth. "This girl," she said quietly, to no one and everyone, "has never understood what it means to be in this house." Kletchi said nothing. Ada stood, excused herself, took the folder upstairs, and locked the bathroom door behind her. She sat on the tile floor. For 4 minutes she let herself feel all of it without management or strategy or performance. The anger, the fear, the exhaustion of being surrounded by people who had decided what she was worth and were now irritated that she had not agreed. 4 minutes. Then she photographed every page of the document, sent it to a daze, and flushed her face with cold water until her eyes were clear. She went back downstairs. She finished breakfast. She passed the pepper when Obi needed it. That afternoon, a daze called. This document is not a formality. It is a legal instrument designed to strip you of parental primacy before the child is born. If you had signed it, fighting for full custody later would have been significantly harder. Ada said, "I know. They have a lawyer helping them construct this. Someone with family law experience. I know that too. Adaize paused. Ada, how are you? Ada looked out the window of the car. Lagos moved past in its usual unrelenting way. Traffic, color, noise, life pressing against itself from every direction. I am counting, Ada said. How many days left? Adaize has been inside for 4 weeks. I need 4 more. Can you hold 4 more weeks? Ada watched a woman cross the street ahead, a baby tied to her back, a basket balanced on her head, walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who has carried heavy things so long that balance has become her natural state. Yes, Ada said. I can hold. She held. But the 4 weeks were not gentle. Obi, sensing resistance, stopped performing warmth entirely. She did not become loud. She became precise. She began referring to the baby exclusively with Naji family names, as if Ada's contribution were purely biological. She began scheduling family events on dates she knew Ada had clinic commitments, and then commenting on Ada's absence with a concern designed to sound like disappointment. She organized a lunch for the women in her social circle. Ada was invited. At that lunch, Obi introduced her to 7 women with the phrase, "This is Kletchi's wife. She has no family here, so we are all she has." Said with warmth, received with smiles. Devastating in its precision because it was both true in the narrow sense and completely false in every sense that mattered. Ada smiled through all of it. Chief Naji, meanwhile, began mentioning Adaize at dinner. There, Adaize, the planted one. I saw that Madhu woman again at a meeting. Remarkable family. Exactly the kind of connection that serves a business well. He said this looking at nothing in particular. He did not need to look at Ada. The words were aimed without requiring aim. And Kletchi. This is the part of the story I want you to sit with, because Kletchi was not a villain. That is what made it so hard. He was a man caught between 2 versions of who he could be. And every time he faced the choice, he chose the version that required less courage. He saw what his parents were doing. Ada knew he saw it because she knew him. She could read the discomfort in his silences, the guilt in the way he avoided her eyes some mornings, the fatigue of a man spending enormous energy pretending not to see what was directly in front of him. One night, 3 weeks before the end, he came to their room late. Ada was already in bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark and did not move for a long time. Then he said, I want to talk to my father. Ada's heart moved. She kept her voice even. What will you say? That this has to stop, that you are my wife, that whatever he is planning. He stopped, started again. I am going to tell him clearly. Ada looked at the ceiling. She thought carefully about her next words because she understood that this was a fragile moment, the kind that could go either way depending on what she said. She said, Kletchi, I love that you want to do that. But I need you to wait, just a little longer. Can you trust me? He turned to look at her in the dark. You keep saying that, because I mean it every time. He was quiet. Then, are you okay? Truly? Ada looked at her husband. She felt the complicated grief of loving someone who was disappointing her in slow motion, not through cruelty, but through the cowardice of a man who loved his comfort more than his convictions. She said, I will be okay. I promise you that. He reached over and took her hand. He held it. Neither of them spoke again. Ada stared at the ceiling and counted the days. The morning they asked her to leave, Ada had been ready for 11 days. Chief Naji called a family meeting at 8 in the morning. He sat at the head of the dining table. Obi sat to his right. Kletchi sat to his left with the posture of a man who had been told where to sit and had sat there. Ada walked in, saw the arrangement, and understood immediately that this was not a conversation. This was a sentencing. Adaize, their Adaize, the planted one, was in the adjoining sitting room. Ada caught the edge of her presence through the half-open door. A small nod, invisible to anyone not looking for it. The recording had been running for 40 minutes. Chief Naji spoke with the deliberateness of a man who had rehearsed. Ada, This family has given you every opportunity. You have been welcomed, supported, and included. In return, you have shown that you cannot integrate. You have refused family guidance. You have undermined decisions made for this household's good. And frankly, he folded his hands, you do not bring what this family needs. Obi spoke next, her voice soft as always, soft the way a weapon can be when it does not need to be loud. We wish you no harm, my dear. We simply need what is best for our son and our grandchild. Ada said, and my child. Obi's eyes did not change. The child is a Naji. The room was completely still. Ada looked at Kletchi. Kletchi's jaw was working. His hands were flat on the table. Ada watched him and saw the moment she had both dreaded and prepared for. The moment her husband faced his final choice. He had told her he would speak to his father. He had told her he trusted her. He had held her hand in the dark. Now he sat at a table where his father had arranged the chairs. Ada waited to see which version of himself he would choose to be. Kletchi's voice came out thin. She is my wife. She is carrying my child. Chief Naji looked at his son. It was the look of a man who has made his son's choices for so long that the son has forgotten he has any. Kletchi, Chief Naji said very quietly. Every opportunity you have ever had, every door that opened for you, every success you have built your name on. Who made those things possible? Silence. Who paid for London? Who made the first introduction? Who built the company you now call your career? Kletchi's face changed. Not all at once, gradually, the way a light dims when someone is slowly turning a dial in another room. He said nothing. His hands stayed flat on the table. And Ada understood. Completely. Finally. Kletchi would not choose her. Not today. Not because he did not love her, but because he had never learned to stand in his own authority, and this was not the morning he would learn it. She felt something finalize inside her. Not anger, completion. The closing of a door she had been watching swing for months. She looked at Chief Naji. She looked at Obi. She looked at her husband one last time. She said, I want you to remember that I was calm. I want you to remember that I did not beg. I want you to remember this room. Obi stood. Pack your things, she said. We will arrange for the rest to be sent. Ada stood. She looked at Obi with an expression that made the older woman pause for just a fraction of a second. Not fear exactly, but a sudden animal awareness that something about this situation was not what she had assumed. Ada said, I will pack my things. She walked upstairs. She did not rush. She packed what she had brought to this marriage. She packed her mother's photograph. She packed the small notebook where she had written names for her baby. She packed her father's letter, still in its fold. She did not pack the suitcase they had given her as a wedding gift. She brought her own. At the gate, Ada paused. She turned back once. The compound was quiet. Chief Naji had come to the veranda. Obi stood beside him. Kletchi was visible through the window, standing, not following. Ada looked at them from the gate. She said clearly enough to carry, I did not come here to be thrown away. I came here to see who you were. She paused. Now I know. She turned and walked out. Behind her, she heard Obi's voice, sharp and sudden. She has nothing. She will come back begging within a month. Ada did not turn around. She got into a waiting car. The driver was someone Chief Naji had never seen before. The car pulled into traffic and disappeared into Lagos. In the back seat, Ada closed her eyes, put both hands on her stomach, and for the first time since all of this began, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not the strategy, not the plan, the human weight of it. The marriage that had started with wobbling chairs and extraordinary pepper soup. The husband who had held her hand in the dark and still could not stand. The child growing inside her who deserved a world that had not yet been built. She sat with that weight for exactly the length of one song on the radio. Then she opened her eyes. James, she said to the driver, call attorney Adaiz. Tell her the recording is complete. Tell her we are ready to file. James nodded once. Yes, Madame Osei. And the countdown entered its final phase. The first court date was 3 weeks later. Ada's legal team filed simultaneously in 3 courts: an emergency maternal protection order in the family division, a fraud complaint regarding the parental authority document in the civil division, and a harassment injunction naming Chief Naji and Obi Naji individually. Chief Naji received the notices and made 2 phone calls within the hour. The first was to his lawyer, who told him that the filings were serious and the recordings Ada's team had submitted were extensive. The second was to a judge he had known for 9 years, a man who owed Chief Naji a favor from a land dispute quietly resolved in 2019. 3 days before the hearing, that judge reviewed Ada's petition and issued a procedural dismissal. Insufficient documentation, the ruling said. Resubmit with additional evidence. Ada's team received the ruling at 6 in the evening. James drove to the location where Ada was waiting. He walked in holding the document, and his face told her everything before his words did. Ada read it once. She sat down. She had known this was possible. She and Daisy had prepared 3 escalation paths: the Federal Family Division, the appeals track, the journalist contacts who had been quietly briefed on the story's broad outlines without being given names. She knew all of this, and still. She sat in that chair with the dismissed petition in her hands and felt the terror of a woman who has prepared for everything and is now discovering that preparation and protection are not the same thing. The fear was not abstract. It was physical. It lived in her chest and pressed upward and made the room feel smaller. Her child, her baby growing inside her right now, 7 weeks from arrival, depending on her completely. What if the system that was supposed to protect them had already been purchased by the man she was fighting? What if preparation was not enough? James sat across from her. He did not rush her. He had worked for Emmanuel Osei for 22 years, and he had learned from Emmanuel that sometimes the most important thing you can offer a person is the space to feel what they are feeling without immediately trying to fix it. After a long time, Ada said, "He got to the judge." "Yes," James said. "How long for the federal appeal? If we file tonight, 2 weeks. Possibly less if we request expedited review on grounds of imminent harm." Ada pressed her lips together. 2 weeks. 8 months pregnant. 2 weeks of knowing that Chief Naji was somewhere in this city feeling like he had won. She said, "File it tonight." She looked up at James. Her eyes were wet. She did not look away or try to hide it. "James," she said, "am I going to lose her?" James held her gaze. "No," he said, quietly and with complete certainty. "No, you are not." Ada nodded. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs. She stood up. "If you have ever been at the lowest point of a fight, you needed to win. If you have ever sat in a room holding a piece of paper that told you the system was not going to protect you and then stood up anyway, then you know exactly what that moment cost Ada. She stood up anyway. She filed that night. Then she made a second call. To a woman named Chidinma Okeke, who ran the Society and Culture column for one of Lagos's most widely read publications. Ada did not give her the story. She gave her a date. 3 weeks from now, Ada said. The Osei Foundation Summit. I will be giving the keynote address. You will want to be there. Chidinma was quiet for a moment. Why? Ada said. Because the things I'm going to say will matter to a lot of women in this city. A pause. Are we talking about your situation? We are talking about every woman who has been told she has nothing. Another pause. Then, I will be there. While Ada prepared, the Naji family celebrated. Obi organized what she called a family introduction, a gathering for 60 of her closest social contacts to meet Adaeze properly. Not as an attorney, as Kletchi's future wife, as the woman the family had chosen. The event was held at a private garden in Victoria Island on a Sunday afternoon. Linen tablecloths, fresh flowers, afternoon light doing everything afternoon light is asked to do at events designed to impress. Obi wore her best. She moved through her guests with the satisfaction of a woman who has corrected an error and restored order. She introduced Adaeze to each cluster of guests with the proprietary pride of someone displaying an acquisition. Adaeze wore a pale yellow dress and smiled graciously and said the right things to every person who spoke to her. Kletchi sat at the far end of the garden with a glass of water he did not drink. At 3:15 in the afternoon, when all 60 guests were seated and Obi had just begun speaking about the importance of family and the right foundations for a union, Adaeze stood up. The table went quiet. People assumed she was about to add to Obi's speech. She opened her clutch. She removed a badge, a legal identification badge. She placed it on the table in front of her in a motion so calm and deliberate that it took several guests a full 3 seconds to understand what they were seeing. Then she spoke. "My name is Adaeze Madu. I am a senior attorney at Madu and Associates, licensed family law practitioners. I am not here as a guest of this family. I have never been a guest of this family." She looked at Obi directly. "I have been here as legal counsel and witness for my client, Ada Ose Naji, the legal wife of Kletchi Naji." Obi's hand gripped the edge of the table. Adaeze continued. "Over the past 10 weeks, in the course of my presence in and around this family, I have collected recordings, documents, and witness testimony relating to the following: coercion of a pregnant woman, fraudulent preparation of a parental authority instrument, conspiracy to separate a mother from her unborn child, and coordination with a judicial officer to obstruct a legitimate legal proceeding." She looked at Chief Naji, who had gone very still. "These materials have been submitted to the Federal Family Division, the Legal Practitioners Disciplinary Committee regarding the judge in question, and the Independent Corrupt Practices Commission." The garden was completely silent. A bird called somewhere in the trees. Adaeze picked up her badge, put it back in her clutch, and snapped it shut. "You have all been served as witnesses to this statement." She looked at the 60 guests, many of whom were already reaching for their phones, and many of whom would be making calls within minutes. "Thank you for attending." She walked out. Behind her, the garden erupted, not loudly, in the urgent whisper of 60 people from Lagos society, all processing the same information at the same time and understanding exactly what it meant for everyone at that table. Obi did not move. She sat at the head of her own table, surrounded by the women she had invited to celebrate, and felt the ground shift beneath her in a way she could not correct with charm or composure. These were not strangers. These were her social circle, the women whose opinions shaped invitations, whose silence or speech determined reputation. Every one of them had just watched Obi Naji be exposed in her own garden, at her own event, by the woman she had personally brought into her home. There would be no recovering from this quietly. There would be no version of events that made it look like a misunderstanding. They had all been there. They had all seen. Chief Naji's hand was flat on the linen tablecloth. Kletchi's glass of water was still full. 7 days later, the Federal Family Division issued an expedited ruling. Maternal protection order granted. The parental authority document declared fraudulent and void. Chief Naji and Obi Naji named in the harassment injunction. The judge who had dismissed the original petition referred to the disciplinary committee. Chief Naji's lawyer called him with the ruling and said carefully, "Sir, we need to discuss the corrupt practices filing separately. This has become very serious." Chief Naji sat in his office, the office with the view of the city he had built his career looking down at, and said nothing. Outside the window, Lagos continued without him. The Ose Foundation Summit was held 3 weeks later in a hall where the light came through tall windows and the seats were filled with people who understood that power, handled well, is a form of service. Chidinma Okeke from the Society column was in the 3rd row with a notebook. Chief Naji was near the back. He had to be there. The Foundation's infrastructure contracts touched 4 of his company's active projects. He came with the posture of a man who still believed he could manage this. He did not know what was coming. Ada walked onto the stage in a simple dress the color of deep water. Her pregnancy was fully visible now. 10 days from her due date, her body carrying its full weight with a steadiness that made several people in the audience straighten their own posture instinctively. She did not begin with gratitude or pleasantries. She said, "My father used to say that the truest test of a person's character is not how they treat someone powerful. It is how they treat someone they believe cannot fight back." The room was quiet from the first word. Ada continued. Her voice was conversational. She was not performing. She was telling the truth the way people tell the truth when they have been through something that has burned away everything unnecessary. She talked about dignity. She talked about the cruelty of people who mistake silence for weakness. She talked about mothers, what it means to carry a life inside you while the world around you tries to tell you that life belongs to someone else. She did not say the Naji name once. She did not need to, because at a certain point she said this: the scholarship program my father built, the one that has funded engineering students across this country for 38 years, it has produced remarkable people. People who built careers, built companies, built families. People who might never have had those opportunities without my father's belief that education should not be rationed by birth. She paused. One of those scholars came back and built a career in construction. His family became people of standing in this city, people who felt entitled to decide who was worthy of their son. Another pause. They built their pride on my father's generosity. She looked out at the audience calmly. And then they tried to discard my father's daughter. In the back of the room, Chief Naji's face went through something that had no clean name. It was not shame exactly. It was the collapse of a man who has just understood that the architecture of his pride was built on someone else's foundation. And that person is standing on a stage in front of 400 people, explaining it without raising her voice. He did not stand up. He could not stand up. Ada's voice remained steady. I am not telling this story for anger. I am not here for revenge. She looked out at the audience. I am here because this room is full of people who shape things, who decide which companies get contracts, which families get partnerships, which foundations get supported. She let that sit for 3 seconds. And I believe the people in this room deserve to know what the people they partner with do when they think no one important is watching. The applause that followed was not the loud, performative kind of an audience that has been asked to clap. It was the serious applause of people who have just been given information they intend to use. Chidinma's pen did not stop moving. Chief Naji left before the final address. Obi, watching from home on a live stream, a guest had started broadcasting 20 minutes in, closed her laptop and sat in the silence of a house that had begun, quietly, to change its meaning. Ada gave birth 11 days later. A girl. She named her Emeke, which in her family meant one who does what must be done. The birth was peaceful. Adiz was there. James was in the waiting area. The room was warm and the doctors were kind. When they placed the baby on Ada's chest, she did not cry immediately. She just looked. She looked at her daughter's face with the complete attention of a person meeting the most important thing they have ever done. She whispered, I kept you. I kept you through everything. In the months that followed, consequences arrived with the patience of things that were always going to happen. Chief Naji's company lost 2 foundation-adjacent contracts within 90 days. His lawyer settled the corrupt practices, filing quietly, privately, and expensively. 3 business associates who had witnessed Adazi's statement at the garden event took meetings they had previously scheduled with him and booked them with other people instead. He was not ruined overnight. He was diminished steadily, which, for a man whose identity was built entirely on standing, was its own form of total loss. Obi's social world contracted the way a tide goes out. The women from the garden event, all 60 of them, understood what they had witnessed. In Lagos society, that understanding moves fast and settles permanently. Invitations slowed. Calls became shorter. The women who once gathered at her table found reasons to gather elsewhere. She had the house without Ada in it. She discovered it was not what she had needed. Kletchi called Ada 4 times. She did not block him. She simply did not answer. There was nothing cruel in it. She had already grieved him. She had nothing left to say that would be useful. His lawyer eventually contacted James. There was a letter, 3 paragraphs, formal, asking about supervised visitation. Ada read it. She thought about it for 8 days. She sent back 2 conditions: individual therapy, documented and ongoing, and a legal agreement that Naji family members would have no involvement in any decision about Emeki's life without Ada's explicit written consent. Whether Kletchi honored those conditions, and what kind of father he became, That is a story still being written. And it is no longer Ada's story to tell. Ada ran the foundation. She expanded the maternal health program to 9 states. She funded 3 new clinics in communities where women had been delivering babies on floors because no one had bothered to build anything better. She created a legal aid program for women facing family law disputes without resources. She did not talk about what had happened to her in any interview. When asked, she said simply, "I went through something difficult. It clarified what this work is for." One evening, a Thursday, late after Amika had been put to sleep, Ada sat alone in her home office. The city moved quietly outside the window. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. Inside, face down, was the photograph. Her wedding photograph. Simple clothes, simple background, 2 people standing together in a moment that had felt, genuinely, like a beginning. She picked it up. She looked at it for a long time. She did not feel rage. She did not feel triumph. She felt something more honest than either, the aching, complicated grief of a life that had been real and then had not been, of a love that was genuine and still insufficient, of a man who had held her hand in the dark and could not follow that gesture into daylight. She felt all of it. Then she set the photograph down. She turned off the lamp. She walked to Amika's room and stood in the open doorway, watching her daughter breathe in the soft dark. She whispered, barely sound at all, "You will never have to make yourself small for anyone. Not for anyone." She pulled the door gently closed, and then she went to sleep. Not as a woman who had won, as a woman who had survived, built something from the survival, and was now, finally, simply resting. There is a version of this story where we end on the destruction, on Chief Naji's empty contracts and Obi's unreturned calls, and Kletchi sitting alone with his choices. But that version puts the villains at the center of a story that was never about them. This story is about what it costs to be a person who refuses to become what was done to them. Ada could have become bitter. She had every right to. She could have taken the pain of that hallway, that dining table, that dismissed court petition, and let it harden into something permanent. She did not. Not because she was perfect. Not because she never sat on a cold tile floor and felt the full weight of being afraid, but because she had a father who showed her, for 26 years, what it looks like to move through the world with your hands open instead of clenched. The hand you push away today may be the hand that decides your tomorrow. But that is not why you treat people with dignity. You treat people with dignity because you are a person, because they are a person, because that is the only foundation anything real can be built on. If someone in your life is being told right now that they have nothing, share this story with them. And if you have ever been underestimated by someone who mistook your silence for surrender, drop a comment. Just 2 words if that is all you have. I held, because you did, and it mattered, and you are still here.